Mm. Will I be able to see any of the audience members, or is that too difficult to do?
Sorry, Derek. Can you please repeat? Did you not see us, or? Let Let us try to fix that for a second. Yeah. Can you hear us?
Yes, if you're
Okay.
speaking to me, yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Can you also see the camera? Can you see us?
So I can see you guys, yes,
Okay.
but I
Okay.
cannot see anyone in the audience, and I'm wondering
Oh,
if that
okay.
might be possible. If not, don't worry about it.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Because we'll change the camera angle. So if the panel will if people
Yeah,
in the
I
panel
see.
are talking, the camera will shut the panel, and then yeah, we'll just show
Okay,
the
thank
audience as
you.
well. Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Habibie Center's Talking ASEAN seminar, and thank you for joining us for this event. Today, we will be discussing the US foreign policy post-election, anticipating changes in global strategy. My name is Indira Utomo. I am a researcher for the ASEAN Studies program at the Habibie Center, and I will be moderating today's discussion. Before we begin, I would like to remind you to please keep your phone on silent. Thank you. The year 2024 has been marked as a pivotal election year globally, with major elections taking places in countries like Indonesia, India, and beyond. However, the election that has captured the most global attention was just recently concluded on November 5th, with Donald Trump securing a landslide victory against Kamala Harris. Today's seminar will try to unpack the implications of Trump's return to the White House for US foreign policy, but also particularly in the Indo-Pacific and ASEAN regions. Will Trump 2.0 echo the domestic focus protectionist posture of his previous administration? And how might his policies impact critical issues such as the South China Sea disputes and rising tensions in the Taiwan Strait? Furthermore, we will also explore how a second Trump presidency could reshape the geopolitical and geoeconomic dynamics in the Indo-Pacific, affecting regional stability, trade, and also strategic partnerships. Today, we are joined by our three distinguished speakers. First, we have Derek Grossman, who is joining us straight from the US. Good evening, and also good morning from Jakarta. Derek?
Thank you. Thank you. Good
Um,
evening from Southern California, and good morning to you
Thank you so much for joining us.
all there in Jakarta.
Um, Derek is a senior defense analyst at Rand Corporation, focusing on a range of national security policy and Indo-Pacific security issues. He has been widely quoted regionally and globally and has published extensive commentaries and journal articles, including for Asia policy, foreign policy, and international security, just to name a few. Professor at the University of Southern California. We also have our second speaker here, Mr. Muhammad Faisal Karim. Pak Faisal is a Islam International Indonesia, and he specializes in the nexus of domestic politics and transnational issues, emphasizing Southeast Asia in his research. He holds a PhD in politics and international studies from the University of Warwick, UK. Last but definitely not least, we also have our third speaker, Ms. Diana Sutikno, at the Center for Policy Strategy for the Asia Pacific and Africa, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Republic of Indonesia. She was also previously the Consul General for Indonesian Consulate General in Osaka from 2020 to 2023, making her the first Indonesian women's Consul General in Osaka. Budiana also holds an LLM in International Human Rights Law from the University of Nottingham, UK. So we'll begin today's seminar with individual presentations from each of our distinguished speakers. And later, we will open the floor for questions and answers sessions. And for those of you who are joining us online, we also encourage you to drop your questions through the chat box on YouTube. So without further ado, we will go straight to our first speaker, Derek Grossman, who will share his perspective and give an overview on the US foreign policy. Derek, you have 15 minutes and the time is yours.
Thank you, and good evening once again from Southern California. And I want to thank the Habibie Center for the kind invitation to join you all today. And I'd like to briefly discuss the impact President-elect Donald Trump's return to the White House in January likely holds for Southeast Asia. The incoming administration appears poised to reinvigorate the Indo-Pacific strategy devised during Trump's first term, which focused on countering China. Several countries, namely the Philippines and Vietnam, will applaud this approach. Others, like Indonesia and Singapore, may worry about the potential for war coming to their neighborhood. But there will be a much broader welcome to Trump's likely deprioritizing of promoting values, such as democracy and human rights, abroad in favor of a more transactional approach that strictly aims at achieving U.S. national interests, especially among authoritarian and semi-authoritarian regimes that comprise most Southeast Asian states. Overall, Trump's likely policies could put the United States in a better position to compete long-term against China in the region. Rather than nominating a team of foreign policy and national security officials of a more isolationist flavor, who might seek to downgrade or dismantle Trump's Indo-Pacific strategy in favor of changing the United States from within, his key picks have gone in the opposite direction. His early selection of Senator J.D. Vance, a China hawk, as his vice president, to keep the Indo-Pacific strategy intact. And in recent weeks, his decision to nominate additional China hawks, including Senator Marco Rubio for Secretary of State, Representative Mike Waltz for National Security Advisor, and military veteran and Fox News host Pete Hegseth for Defense Secretary, only reinforced the notion that competition against China is here to stay. For Southeast Asia, the clear winners of a competitive strategy are the Philippines and Vietnam. These two countries are bearing the brunt of China's expansive nine-dash-line sovereignty claims in the South China Sea. They are also at the forefront of challenging these claims, which are based on Beijing's interpretation of its historical rights and in direct contravention of international law and norms of behavior enshrined in the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, or UNCLOS. In recent years, Manila has expanded and deepened its security alliance with Washington to help counter Beijing's increasing use of gray zone tactics in the South China Sea, especially at the disputed Second Thomas Shoal, Scarborough Shoal, Sabina Shoal, and Pag-asa Island. What is worrisome is that Trump, during his Philippines alliance, when then President Rodrigo Duterte, for example, attempted to cancel the U.S.-Philippines Visiting Forces Agreement, which is a key pact undergirding the two countries' mutual defense treaty, Trump said, and I quote, "I don't really mind if they would like to do that. It will save a lot of money. My views are different than others," end quote. But the current president of the Philippines, Ferdinand Marcos Jr., is the opposite of Duterte. He's pro-U.S. and anti-China, and thus seeks sustainable commitments from Washington. Without U.S. support, the Philippines would be mostly left to fend for itself against growing Chinese encroachments into unlike the Philippines, Vietnam, which is an emerging key strategic partner of the US that also keeps a cordial and productive relationship with China, has little, if any, expectation of US defense of its claims against Beijing in the South China Sea. However, Hanoi continues to benefit from Washington's military assistance as part of the upgrade to the two countries' partnership that began in September of last year. Although the first Trump administration contributed to building up these strategic ties, there were frictions on bilateral trade. Indeed, the Trump administration initiated a review of allegations that Hanoi had been manipulating its currency, not an insignificant concern given that the US is a top trade partner. In the end, however, the Trump administration never designated Vietnam a currency manipulator, and the Biden administration threw out the case. Interestingly, in the readout of their recent phone call, both Trump and Vietnamese leader To Lam discussed economic engagement favorably, suggesting once again that the second Trump administration might overlook trade frictions in the interest of maintaining Hanoi's cooperation against China. The other maritime counterclaimants, Brunei and Malaysia, are also likely to benefit from US support of their claims in the South China Sea. But in the case of Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur has separate concerns about the second Trump administration, including potential new trade tariffs and Trump's likely strong support of Israel, which is unpopular in the Muslim majority country. Malaysia has come out in staunch support of Hamas and would thus oppose Trump if his Israel policy remains intact. Notably, neither of the other two Muslim majority nations in Southeast Asia, Brunei and Indonesia, have taken a similar stance on Israel policy as Malaysia has. Still, other Southeast Asian countries may be less keen to see a second Trump administration waging intensified competition in their region. Indonesia's President Prabowo Subianto visited Beijing in the last few weeks and pledged to accelerate the heightened economic engagement already seen under his predecessor. And he cut a deal with China on overlapping maritime claims in South China Sea that many observers have criticized as being inconsistent with Indonesia. Our Ministry of Foreign Affairs person tackle that after I speak. So I'm just here to, throw out provocative thoughts. During his subsequent stop in Washington earlier this week, not earlier this week, but several weeks ago, Prabowo met with outgoing U.S. President Joe Biden and referred to the United States as, quote unquote, a great friend of Indonesia. The two sides pledged additional military cooperation, demonstrating Indonesia's carefully balanced embrace of both great powers to avoid getting ensnared by either. Switching countries, so in the past, Singapore has expressed deep anxiety over rising U.S.-China competition in the Indo-Pacific. In his keynote speech at the 2019 Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore, then Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong stated, quote, "The United States and China need to work together, and with other countries too, to bring the global system up to date and to not upend the system." More recently, in an interview with Foreign Policy, the Singaporean defense minister said, quote, "We've worked with the Trump administration before. I'm not so much concerned," end quote, suggesting that Singapore believes that an uncomfortable situation will at least be manageable. While it is a security ally of the United States, Thailand has not appreciated increasing great power competition in the region either. Much of this has to do with Bangkok's longstanding historical and cultural ties to Beijing, but it also stems from an aversion to unnecessarily causing problems with its larger neighbor. This has thrown the U.S.-Thai alliance, which was originally conceived to counter the spread of communism during the Cold War, into question. And the two nations are trying to find common ground as Washington continues to pursue its rivalry with Beijing. Potentially, Trump's approach to great power competition could also offer an opening to other authoritarian nations in Southeast Asia, including Cambodia, Laos, and even Myanmar. Because Trump is likely to engage in a transactional approach, these countries could end up with closer U.S. ties. They seek a values-free environment in which Washington avoids, from their perspective, lecturing them on human rights and the need for democracy. But this might not come to fruition. In his first term, for example, Trump attempted to reset U.S.-Cambodia ties, but in a letter to then Prime Minister Hun Sen, Trump nonetheless called out the importance of returning to the path of democratic governance, in quotes. Regardless, there is at least the opportunity to reset ties with these countries and unexpectedly challenge Beijing in its own backyard. From a broader perspective, it will be interesting to see how the minilateral groups to achieve U.S. objectives in the region, whether it is the Australia-UK-US Pact, otherwise known as AUKUS, or the so-called Squad, the Australia, Japan, Philippines, and U.S. group, or the U.S., Japan, Philippines trilateral group, or any other number of groups that Beijing that are out there right now, while Beijing views these collective security mechanisms as part of Washington's attempts to contain it. Given Trump's renewed focus on great power competition, he is likely to keep these groups intact and perhaps even create new ones. He did, after all, resuscitate the moribund Quad in 2017, which is, of course, Australia, India, Japan, the US, which suggests that he's not averse to going beyond one-on-one deal-making and finding multilateral solutions to challenges in the Indo-Pacific. But Trump's willingness to endure multilateralism has limits. He had a strained relationship with ASEAN, attending only one ASEAN summit himself in 2017, and not even dispatching a cabinet-level official to 2 of the 3 other summits during his term. If this continues, then Southeast Asia will view the second Trump administration as fundamentally unserious about to attempt to steer clear of it, potentially making the Trump administration's job more difficult. But this, in my opinion, is a surmountable problem, especially if Washington calmly explains the benefits of pushing back against Beijing, with the latter proving the former's point by continuing its assertive behavior throughout the region. And I'm going to leave it there and look forward to the questions and answers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Derek, for sharing your insightful remarks. That was very, very comprehensive, and we sure learned a lot from your presentation, and we will get back to you again during the Q&A session. Thank you so much, Derek. And now we will move on to our second speaker, Pak Faisal Karim. Pak Faisal will deliver a presentation on the U.S. approach towards the ASEAN region and also strengthening engagement between the U.S. and ASEAN during the new administration. Pak Faisal, you also have 15 minutes. And
sorry, but you're on mute, Indira. I'm sorry.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes,
I couldn't hear what you just said. Yeah.
Can you hear us now?
Yeah, now I can hear you. Yeah, sorry.
Okay, great.
Did my presentation come in loud and clear? Sorry, it might have been a little choppy.
Yes, it was quite clear.
Okay, good.
The sound was okay. Yeah, thank you.
All right, perfect. Thank you. Okay, on to the next speaker. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Mbak Indira. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much. I need to say to Habibie Center for inviting me to share some thought on this so-called Donald Trump 2.0 and how this basically kind of an impact Southeast Asia in general. And I think Derek has already kind of provide us with an overview of how this might impact Southeast Asia. So I might as well try to deep dive into Indonesia, but I think in terms of policy, Ibu Diana will basically provide more coherence Indonesia approach towards such Donald Trump 2.0. But first of all, I like to remind all of you that compare with the Donald Trump 1.0, which is provide us with kind of uncertainty or perhaps kind of anxiety due to the fact that we don't really know what kind of a Trump administration might create kind of a approach towards Southeast Asia. But I think in the second Donald Trump administration, I think at least in Southeast Asia, people, at least in elites level, have already been kind of accept that, and or perhaps already uh, see that coming. So in a way that we know how to deal with the way how Donald Trump approached its foreign policy. First thing, I think, as Derek has already said, it's all about transactional approach. Trump always view the way how they deal with the countries, not in terms of norms, in terms of the global order that usually become kind of a discourse within the U.S., primarily, the neocons or perhaps the Democrats or the liberal. So I think in that sense, Trump is much more predictable because we know that they or he might use, tariff or perhaps some kind of a bombastic policy, but we know that that kind of a bombastic policy is kind of a way for him to leverage in order to negotiate with whatever partners he want to engage with. So that for sure. So we know that he's a very much transactional man. He's very much a populist. So in a way that he consider a domestic audience way much more than the so-called international audience or perhaps the notion of norms. So we can consider that Trump is not a fan of, the so-called normative power of the U.S. or kind of a human rights issue and climate change issue and so on and so forth. So we know that for sure. So that will be easier for Southeast Asia and or perhaps Indonesia to kind of navigate its policy in order to approach Donald Trump. And next, probably. But I think we need to also take into consideration two things, right? The first one, now compared with the previous Donald Trump 1.0, Trump has won decisively. Back in the day, in 2016, Trump's won the electoral votes, college votes, instead of a popular votes. So now it won, well, it will be projected won decisively. So it kind of provide him with more domestic legitimacy. And secondly, I think now even the Senate and also the Congress also being dominated by Republican, which primarily filled with a lot of pro-Trump supporters. And it is more likely that Trump will have backup in terms of its foreign policy from his loyalists. So this will basically enhance Trump's so-called Trumpism, or what I call is a populist rhetoric and also policy, and we can see how he considered himself as a tariff man, right? And we're going to talk about this later on. But secondly, Southeast Asia, at least from the mainstream U.S. foreign policy establishment, is always been considered as a strategic partners for the U.S., especially when it comes to its rivalry with China. I think Southeast Asia is also kind of a battleground for influence as well as contestation between the U.S. and China. But somehow I think under Trump, such importance may not be really stick. So I think Trump has focused primarily his view or resources more into Europe and Middle East due to the current ongoing situation that strategically definitely push the US, and in this case Trump, to pay more attention on that. But bear in mind, Southeast Asia is still important in a way that it becomes a kind of a critical for global supply chain, especially when it comes to US-China rivalry. It's still a choke line in trade, and also is part of the growing global supply chain that focus on the so-called critical minerals and so on and so forth. So I think Trump most likely will focus more on a bilateral approach to these countries or to this region instead of enhancing the so-called multilateral approach toward ASEAN. And it could be a good news for those who can approach Trump directly, bilaterally, yeah. And I think our president Prabowo seems to eager to engage Trump directly or bilaterally. And in fact, when he called Trump, he said that loudly that he's willing to go wherever Trump wants to meet him, even though until now it's not yet materialize. But in general, I think there is a kind of a shift in terms of a Southeast Asian approach. We cannot approach the U.S. through multilateral lens, unlike under Biden administration, which prefer primarily on this so-called multilateral agreement through IPEF, through its Indo-Pacific strategy, or even though it's not multilateral in a sense that everyone is engaged, but at least Biden has this kind of a minilateral approach, still approaching the countries within kind of a groups level instead of a bilateral level. So I think this will also push us to rethink how basically the notion of so-called ASEAN, framework on Indo-Pacific, for instance, the thing that we are hold dearly, when it comes to approaching this Indo-Pacific, should be reconsidered in light of the way how the U.S. may not see multilateral engagement as a something that it's meaningful for him. And I think next. And secondly, this is the elephant in the room, basically trade policy and tariff impact. Trump has said many times in his campaign trail that he's going to basically increase, especially those who are working with China or perhaps kind of having its supply chain tied to China. And I think this might be a good news, as some economists might suggest, but also a bad news for countries that is not prepared. So what is the good news? The good news will be, there will be a supply chain disruption. There will be a offshoring of investment from China to outside of China. And I think we already know every countries will basically try to their best to get this kind of advantage. I think Malaysia tried to done that, right, in terms of the high-tech technology. The same goes with Vietnam. I think recently we see a lot of a deal coming in, NVIDIA, Apple and things like that. They try to find out how to offshore from China. And I think some countries might be better off when it comes to taking or negotiate the deal. Yeah, it seems to me Indonesia kind of lagging behind in terms of how to basically attract this offshore company to Indonesia, but some other countries in Southeast Asia able to do that. So that's the good news for some countries who are prepared to take advantage of this supply chain disruption, but other might not so much, especially when I think when it comes to Indonesia, our kind of projects on hilirisasi or downstreaming is built upon the idea is that we try to downstream our raw materials, but 90% or some people say it's 80% goes all the way to China. So this could be a problem when Indonesia, I think, try to kind of have a free trade in a very specific aspect, which is the critical minerals, which I don't think until now it's still under negotiation table. But should it not be able to get the deal done, I think it will be difficult for Indonesia to get advantage with incoming President Donald Trump that try to securitize or try to create a fragmentation over this supply chain issue. And secondly, I think we already know also that there might be a tariff-driven policy from the U.S. We don't really know how big or how impactful the scale for this kind of a policy that the U.S. or at least under Trump try to pursue. But definitely it will create at least uncertainty in a business environment. It might to some extent also impact Indonesia, but again, a lot of Indonesian export to the U.S. is usually through the so-called generalized preference trade, GSP, general system of preferences, which allows Indonesia not to get a lot of tariff. But I think should Trump impose tariff to our fishery product, for instance, that will also basically make a negative impact toward our fishery sector. Next. Yeah. The question then, what expected policy shift that I think, or I will argue, will impact Southeast Asia? First, definitely, Trump will not use the so-called geoeconomic policy or economic tools to lure or to attract Southeast Asia to be part of its supply chain, or perhaps to be part of its idea about economic bloc in Asia, usually through Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. Even without the cancellations of IPEF, we see IPEF is not really so much gain traction due to lack of commitment and also a very high level. He's focused on technology and so on and so forth. But without any kind of economic engagement from the US, I think Southeast Asia and definitely Indonesia will deepen the cooperation with China. So this also needs to be considered, at least by whoever becomes, policymakers in the U.S. To what extent they are not willing to engage economically with Southeast Asia, because this will basically incentivize Southeast Asia to be more deepening its relation with China. And secondly, I think due to the increase of tariff, which is again 10 to 20% for all of the countries and 60% for the Chinese goods, there is potential decline in Southeast Asia-US trade. I think Indonesia in relation in terms of trade with the US is still a positive on Indonesian side. So I think again Trump will try his best to basically reduce this kind of a gap, the same way of how we try to reduce the same gap with China. So his populist idea will look at to what extent I have a negative trade balance with those countries, and I'm gonna make a deal with those countries to basically leverage the negative trade balance that they have. So in a sense, I see the potential decline, but what kind of sectors that will hurt the most with this kind of potential decline, then I think we need to ask the economists for that. But I think it's more likely, fishery sector, our shrimp, we sell a lot of shrimp to the US, and so on and so forth. Next. Now, I think this is also the last aspect that I want to discuss, basically the challenge of foreign direct investment. The idea is that, currently Indonesia wanted to diversify its foreign direct investment sources, right? Because people might criticize, Joko Widodo, that seems to be more taking a lot of investment from China, even though that is not true, because we try to diversify our source of investment, and one of those sources will be the US, right? We try our best to lobby, Elon Musk, Apple to invest, research and development, manufacturing, or perhaps even surprisingly, with Trump being in office, I think there will be possible decreased investment due to the offshoring. Yes, we can get in foreign direct investment from those companies from China, but I think, as I said earlier, it's highly unlikely due to the competition within Southeast Asia. So we compete with the likes of Vietnam, Malaysia, and those countries have prepared more, and especially for high-tech industry, I think most investment will more likely going to Malaysia. This will result in increased dependence on China, or perhaps Japan. We can diversify this to Japan. But I would argue, again, last month we've seen how President Trump has secured 15 billion worth of investment from China, but I think it's not so much with the US. So in a sense that from the investment alone, we can see that it is a kind of an opportunity for China to basically dominating the scene within this kind of a foreign policy, foreign direct investment. But it's up to Indonesia to whether we're going to have the same goals like what's happening in Australia or in Europe, where we have this kind of a foreign direct screening. Yeah, in Europe there is a kind of a policy where they securitize the foreign direct investment because they don't want to be very much dependent on the FDI. But I don't think in Indonesia this will happen anytime soon. But what we can expect from Indonesia is basically how Indonesia will manage to diversify the source, probably not to the US, but primarily to EU or Japan. I think the last one probably, last one is about the climate-linked investment. Again, Indonesian transition to a green energy or clean energy hinge upon the idea of international community help Indonesia to transition toward that. That's the reason why we have this just energy transition. And I think the US, along the EU, are also the major player in making sure that Indonesia and Southeast Asia and in general kind of move toward that through several funding and donors and things like that. But I think we already know that the US under Trump will more likely to focus on the dirty energy, oil, coal, which is still abundantly distributed in a lot of US states. So in a sense that I suspect it will reduce incentive for green investment in Indonesia, as well as it will impact on at least short-term gains over sustainability and impact on the US environmental commitment toward the so-called just energy transition. So I think these are three or four with the climate-linked investment. Four major issue would, I think, will affect the way how Indonesia and the US under Trump will shape the way how Indonesia basically navigate this change, especially under Trump. So I think I stop there. Looking forward for the discussion with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pa Faisal, for the compelling presentation. Very, very comprehensive as well, and thought-provoking as well. We hope that we will see a lot of questions from our audience today. Now, please allow me to move on to our last, but definitely not least, last third speaker, Budiana. Budiana will deliver her presentation highlighting the evolving bilateral ties between Indonesia and the US in political security, economy, and also social cultural sectors. You also have 15 minutes, and the floor is yours.
Nanti boleh minta tolong aja. Thank you so much, Mbak Indra, for the introduction. And being the last speaker, it's quite tricky. Either I think everything has been covered very comprehensively by the previous two speakers, but at the same time, I have a responsibility to probably not summing up, but maybe add more informations on bilateral from the bilateral side of Indonesia and the US. First of all, of course, I'd like to echo others. My previous two speakers in thanking the Habibie Center for the invitation, and especially forwarded to our DG, or the head of the Foreign Policy Strategy Agency of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Indonesia, whom I'm now standing in for him, because he's got, he has to chair a very important meeting for, all the evaluation of our work as the government think tank. So once again, thank you so much, and bear with me with, probably there will be quite a lot of, because the issues covered will be very lengthy, especially covering the spectrum of political security, economic and social cultural sectors of the bilateral ties between Indonesia and the US. However, I'd like to, I will try my best to cover this within the limited time available. So the presentation will cover around 8 issues from the geopolitical, economic challenges, because I wanted to start this as a reminder for all of us how we are confronted these days, globally and regionally, and then going to why the U.S. matters to Indonesia, and then the bilateral ties from time to time between both countries, and the key interests of the U.S. and its implications for the Indo-Pacific. That, of course, will impact Indonesia, specifically political security cooperation, economic cooperation, social, cultural, and the way forward. So, of course, everyone is already very informed about the global risk and the interlinked of the global, insecurities and challenges posing many countries from different risk categories. So this is coming from the World Economic Forum 2024. You can see that there are some global risks indicated in green and then yellow and also in blue and red. It's about the economic risk, the environmental risk, geopolitical, societal, and technological. I think everybody must should be reminded about not only the risk in security, instability, the armed conflict, the interstate violence, human rights violation, and also the pandemic that we just, the world has, finally survived the pandemic at that scale. And I think it's important for us to prepare for any kind of, infectious diseases and risks that will make the world, face another, severe impact. So those are things that I think everybody is very much aware of, and that the world still needs to work together despite all those challenges and political differences. And then, of course, these challenges and disruptions impact geopolitical and geoeconomic landscape. Of course, in terms of the economy, we have seen a global supply chain disruption, the security dynamics and human security, financial market disruption, and political instability. The not only Gaza and then also the Ukraine war, but now we've seen some hidden war like this in Sudan, and then the new development in Syria. I think the world cannot sit idle, especially Indonesia, and in collaboration with other countries, including the U.S., to come together to find the best solution and the peaceful transition to those suffering. And the next one is, and then we come to, the previous speaker, Derek, already mentioned about this election in the U.S. which resulted in the quite, unprecedented win of the Donald Trump as the president-elect, vis-a-vis Kamala Harris. And it's probably, as a woman, personally, I wish that Kamala Harris would win. It would be a very historical thing from the U.S. to have the first female president, right? Obviously, they're not yet ready. And for me, as a woman, I think it's important that we can, continue to aspire for this kind of leadership to rise, in many parts of the world. So, of course, everybody, already, covered, predictions about, what kind of policies, President Trump, Trump 2.0 will look like. And then, of course, it's everywhere in media outlets about America First policy, make America great again, and also maybe make America health again, MAGA and MAHA. So I think everybody is quite, educated about this. And of course, we are anticipating the isolationist approach, the unpredictability. Faisal already mentioned about the predictability, but there is also the risk of unpredictability. As a diplomat for 26 years of experience and negotiator in political security issues for about 18 somewhat years, when dealing with US diplomats, Democrats, Republicans, they have a different kind of approach. And this is something that even as a diplomat, Indonesian diplomats will need to be mindful and continuously trained. Because when facing Republican, I cannot say that it's easier, but it's much more predictable. At the multilateral level, they usually don't want to have too detailed approach. They can just come to the room and ask for a vote, for example. Many countries have engaged in lengthy discussions and negotiated attacks, almost consensus, but then the US will come. We don't agree with that. We ask for a vote. What can we do? Right? This is something that, for me, it's lesson learned. So unpredictability is always there, especially the shift of continuity to domestic polarization. And I think when it comes to democracy, we still want to see that as the second and the third largest democracy, that these two countries can still be role model in forging democracy and spearheading democracy and human rights values. And then, of course, the bilateral and unilateral approach in Indo-Pacific regions, we have seen the mini-lateralism, mini defense lateralism, and President Trump in its first presidency 1.0 was very much informed about this, and may continue to do so with probably different approach, because during Biden we've seen the elevated approach on unilateralism at the leaders element aspect vis-a-vis the technical aspect. And of course we can see, and then with Indonesia, potential partnership in bilateral military cooperation and increased defense pressure. It's highly expected. And for the US, why US matters to Indonesia, and of course we can see that I think the recent visit of President Prabowo Subianto's last November this year can speak quite a high volume, even though he was meeting with the outgoing president. But I think the message at the leaders, would still be, resonate to hopefully be continued to be implemented by President Trump and its administration. So at least, can I just sum up, that the two countries committed to reinforce their comprehensive strategic partnership, focusing on defense, critical technologies, and economic ties. US and Indonesia relations are underpinned by shared interest in regional stability and economic growth. The US is instrumental in Indonesia's effort to enhance its defense capability, particularly in maritime security, as demonstrated by recent agreements on joint training and technology exchange. And economically, the US provides investment and expertise essential for Indonesia's infrastructure development and resource downstreaming initiatives for global supply chains. Faisal already mentioned about the possibility of maybe the slowed pace and maybe the decrease. It's something that we at the foreign ministry have already anticipated that, and so we will have to work around that and how to best navigate the situation. If we can see the bilateral ties between Indonesia and the US follow evolving bilateral ties from time to time. The relations this year arrive at the 75th anniversary. So it's, of course, when it comes to age, it's not just mature. Maybe in the health issue, when you are 75, it could be maybe lansia or aging. But actually, in some countries, even during at the WHO, the threshold of age 75 can be seen as still young. But then we've seen that in terms of bilateral ties, it's a mature relations starting in 1945, and then by 2010 we have the comprehensive partnership, and then the 2015 strategic partnership, which focuses on 6 areas: maritime, defense, economic development, energy, global and regional cooperation, and people-to-people contact, followed by 2023 comprehensive strategic partnership, or CSP, elevating relation to a comprehensive strategic partnership on November 13, 2023. And I think Indonesia is the second country in ASEAN that has secured the CSP, if I'm not mistaken. And then in 2024, recently, both countries agreed on the plan of action. I think important, this document, plan of action, that we are with Japan is also still negotiating plan of action to concretize the comprehensive strategic partnership. So the comprehensive strategic partnership encompasses inclusive economic growth, clean energy transition, people-to-people ties, promoting peace, defense cooperation, and fostering a long-term partnership. Will the CSP continue to be beneficial during the Trump era? So this is the question that will remain to be seen, and I can't, give a, a confirmed answer on that. Let me just move on to the next one on the U.S. key interests and its implication. So there are at least 3 umbrellas of the U.S. key interests and its implications for the Indo-Pacific region that will impact Indonesia. So as Indonesia's position is located in a strategic strategic location in the Indo-Pacific, and its role as a major Asian player, the growing political tensions, the big powers rivalries and the tension in the South China Sea and emerging global challenges, Indonesia's strategic location in the Indo-Pacific as one of the most important international shipping lanes connecting Asia countries with major regions makes Indonesia a pivotal player in regional geopolitics and critical partner in maintaining the free flow of trade and resources. And of course, as a major member of ASEAN, we, maybe informally would like to call ourselves as the natural leader. The largest countries in ASEAN, in terms of the size of the population and so forth. Indonesia plays a leadership role in fostering regional stability and mediating multilateral cooperation, aligning closely with the U.S. Vision for a free and open Indo-Pacific. And this has been highlighted, underscored in the joint statement between the 2 leaders. So, the strategic interest is there, the economic interest is there, and the security commitments is there as well. Oops. What did I do? Okay, the next one is on the political and security cooperation between the 2 countries. Of course, as I said earlier, this year the US and Indonesia have commemorated our 75 years of bilateral ties. We share a abiding common interest in a more prosperous, secure, and democratic Indo-Pacific region. Our security relationship has broadened and deepened in recent decades thanks to consistent participation in dozens of annual engagement, and our cooperation has increased in the areas of cybersecurity, defense cooperation, including cybersecurity, maritime security, counterterrorism, as well as people-to-people contact or ties through training, capacity building, and other academic discussion to broaden perspectives on the political security spectrum. The next one, and this is about the people-to-people ties through joint military exercises. Of course, everyone is already aware about the successful convening of the Super Garuda Shield, involving about 2 countries and 16,000 or 18,000, personnel or participants, making it, one of the largest military exercise. And I think it's something that is highly appreciated by many countries. So this joint military exercise in cybersecurity cooperation, counterterrorism cooperation, maritime security, and people-to-people ties, like such as training, being the negotiator for peace and security at the UN for 4 years, especially in peacekeeping issues, and Indonesia being the top 5 contributing countries, making Indonesia as one of the important peacekeeping countries. And this is something that the US has been very supportive. And then, of course, we have had a lot of cooperation and collaborative efforts with them. And being the one of the permanent countries, security in the Security Council, I think it's a good development. Both leaders have expressed their strong support on the reform of the UN Security Council that will entail, among others, the inclusiveness of Security Council. For me, this is quite surprising because Security Council is not marked by inclusivity, because it's the P5 that basically governs and rules the world, because they have veto power. And I was also one of the negotiating team for Indonesian delegation for UN Security Council reform negotiation, a working group. when P2, P5, usually in some of the issues will differ. It could be between P2 and then P3, or maybe, usually it's P3 and then P2, dealing with some of the, issues, armed conflict or, peace and security issues in the council. But when it comes to Security Council reform, both of them have a very solid position, right? So it's very difficult to basically talk when it comes to ensuring that Security Council can be more inclusive and reflect the dynamic and the world as of today, not in 1945. So I think it's important that the U.S. actually in the joint statement agrees about the inclusivity aspect. So for me, this is interesting. I was not the negotiator of the joint statement, but for me, this is an applaudable development because of their status as one of the P5. So on the economic, just being very quickly on the economic cooperation, Faisal already mentioned about the the surplus side on Indonesia for some time, with the U.S. Reaching in 2023 about 11.5 billion US dollars. In 2023 for Indonesia, U.S. is the third largest export destination after China and Japan. When I was in Japan for 2 years consecutively, Japan was among the top 4. Now Japan comes back to one of the top 2 Indonesians, for Indonesia to export our products. So I think that's, there are some, positive developments in there, and then Indonesia's export to U.S. reached about 23.24 billion US dollar in 2023, with top or key products, of course, palm oil, crustaceans like shrimps, mentioned about shrimps, wooden furniture, textiles, and footwear. When I was working in the Indonesian FDA, dealing with the international cooperation, I think the issue for Indonesians' competitiveness in some of the stringent countries like the US, if we want to maintain this surplus balance, is to make sure that the standard will be up to their the standards. So I think it's important that we continue to strengthen our competitiveness by strengthening our standards for our exports. And it's the GSP thing that they say that it's been hold and still waiting for the approval by the Congress. But we see that this will be still a good positive tool for enabling our product to have a duty-free export to the U.S. So Trump, a lot of people already mentioned about the tariff import, 60% on products from China and about 20% on products from other countries. Then the question will be, can Indonesia replace China as the China's top trading partner? So this is a question that may probably be interested to be discussed. So this is the information on Indonesia-US trade that you will maybe can learn later, and then still on the surplus size on Indonesia. And of course with ASEAN, enjoys a trade surplus as well of more than 250 billion, the majority of which are due to exports of electrical machinery. ASEAN exported some US 73 billion of electrical machinery and equipment in 2021, which makes up 28% of all ASEAN exports to the US. If we see that, ASEAN is, the US is an important trading partner with a total two-way trade in 2023 reaching around 395.9 billion, around 5.80% decrease. So making it the second largest trading partner of ASEAN among dialogue partners. So this is a positive trend. And so we see that the US-Indonesia Economic Cooperation Investment, for the investment, during the first term of President Donald Trump, US investment was decreased from 2.89 billion in 2018 to 1.57 billion in 2020. But under Biden's administration, US FDI steadily increased. So then, of course, many predictions will look into the slow or even decrease economic cooperation in the investment sector. So then, of course, already mentioned, Faisal mentioned about the diversification. It will be quite, challenging later on, because when we talk to some of the partners, our non-traditional partners for investment, and of course, with Japan, with China, and with the US, sort of like a traditional investment partners, but with others, it's been quite slow, but we will continue to be optimistic in pushing forward for the diversification of our, the FDI to Indonesia. I'm going to just pick up to socio-cultural cooperation, and this aspect is part of the soft diplomacy of the US and of course to Indonesia. We have, they just launched a professional exchanges, international visitors leadership program. Over 100 Indonesian leaders participated in US department program focused on diverse areas such as journalism, economic development, financial systems, civil aviation, and cybersecurity, as well as other collaboration. We have the Young Southeast Asian Leaders Initiative, Cultural Heritage Preservation, Higher Education Access, Educational Exchange Program, and so forth, and then the new one maybe on democratic governance and human rights. So how about the way forward? The challenges for Indonesia in Trump 2.0 policies. The second term is projected to slow economic growth in Asia, as predicted, including in Indonesia, declining exports to the higher tariffs and slower U.S. economic growth, pressure on balance of payment and foreign capital flows, a weakening of rupiah. The Minister of Finance, Ibu Sri Mulyani, already warned about the slow pace of the, well, I'm not an economist, but anyway, I'm not a gloom and doom type of person, but it seems like a big clouds are expected to be there in the, to 2025. But I'm an optimist as well, so with all this, potential, downside, we would still be able to have some positive projections. So if we can see a little bit about the, how the countries globally or even in ASEAN position itself vis-a-vis the next presidency of President Trump. The Trump Risk Index issued by the Economist Intelligence Unit 2024 measures countries' exposure to risk from a Trump administration in trade, security, and immigration. So globally, Vietnam, out of all ASEAN countries, Vietnam is positioned to be actually having quite a high risk, mainly because their exposure is, main exposure is trade, reflecting its strong U.S. ties and manufacturing role. They are the manufacturing hub in ASEAN, which could be impacted by potential U.S. tariffs under Trump. But if we see in ASEAN countries, where is Indonesia? Indonesia is around 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So 30 overall exposures to the risk about 32.5%. This is, maybe we're not as most exposed, but some of the, elements that I have mentioned that something that we have to watch for. And of course, the way forward is the U.S. national security and strategy in Trump's first term highlighted Indonesia as an evolving security and economic partner. Thus, we could strengthen the following areas for further collaboration: strengthening political security and maritime partnership, encouraging U.S. investment relocation from China to Indonesia, enhancing people-to-people ties and human resources development, while maintaining a strong partnership with the U.S. Indonesia continues to uphold its independent and active foreign policy, ensuring it leverages both superpowers for its economics and political interests. I think I will stop there, and thank you for bear with me for quite some time, and looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Budiana, for the insightful presentations. You touch a lot upon all sectors very comprehensively, and specifically we can see that there's a lot of factor between Indonesia and the US. And you also pointed a lot of challenges in the economic sectors, especially knowing how it went during Trump's first administrations. And thank you so much, Ibu, for laying out the key points on Indonesia and US relationships very well for our discussion. And we'll now open the floor for questions. And for those of us, for those of you joining us online through YouTube, you can also drop your questions in the chat box. I think we'll take 3 questions for now. Yes, one. Do you see other questions? Anyone? Okay, we'll just go for the first questions, and please state your name and affiliation. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Christian Atriandi Suprianto from Department of International Relations, University of Indonesia. Thank you all for your presentations. I think it gives a bird's view of what we are going to expect for second Trump administration. 2 questions, if I may. One is for all panelists, and the second one is specifically to Derek. I think we all agree. I think the binding threat here is that Trump will usher an America First policy, meaning a more transactionalist policies. And when I think I quote Muhammad Karim's expression about bombastic policy, just to leverage, to make bluffs, right? The question whether the bluffs will be called or not will be a different matter altogether. So, because this is a second Trump administration, and you can only use the same, you cannot use the same tactics twice, right? So the first tactic has been used, so people are more willing to call Trump's bluff. Do you think that's going to be the case now? Because there is uncertainty, but there is also some element of predictability as well, because we have experienced the first Trump administration. And my second question is to Derek specifically. We know that for politicians, including Trump, campaign promises generally may counter bureaucratic opposition or bureaucratic, what Trump calls deep state, right? Bureaucratic conservatism. And I think some of Trump's statements are very controversial, even among Washington's policy circles, including pulling out of Ukraine, more escalation in the Middle East and all that. To what extent do you think Trump's hand-picked officials heading the administration departments and so on can actually carry out Trump's instructions to the letter, instead of perhaps there will be compromises and negotiations with previous policies? Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Christian. Maybe we'll go to Pak Faisal Karim first, and then Budiana, and then Derek can answer both of the questions.
Okay, thank you, Pak Andi, Pak Christian. So basically, I think when it comes to Trump, yes, he may have this kind of a bluffing policy, try to say A, but basically that kind of a way for him to negotiate or opening up talk and things like that. And I think to some extent, I would argue it might works as a leverage, especially we see under Trump administration 1.0, there is a change slightly in the way how South Korea, for instance, increase its military expenditure. The same goes with European Union or NATO in this case, where there is a slight that bombastic kind of a wake-up call. Yes, it may not directly that Trump will, 180 degrees try to change U.S. policy, especially in the U.S., in Europe or in Asia. It still have its partner. It's still considered a lot of cooperation in the region. But I think this might provide kind of a signal that I'm willing to do this. So in a way that it works as a signaling process to these countries. And when it works again in the second Trump administration, I think it could be more effective. Why? Because again, it has a backup from domestic policy makers, the Congress are in his side, the Senate also are in his side. So in a way that it might be more credible, such bombastic, or bluffing would be seen by the partners or even the enemy as a credible, signaling. So I think, in that sense, we can basically play with that kind of a playing field, in a sense that Indonesia can also see that as a signal, and how can we show the leverage as well to Trump, especially in his transactional, language. I think Singapore done that perfectly by showing case to Trump how that kind of a cooperation would lead to kind of a domestic score that he can show off to his domestic audience. So I think that's my take.
Thank you, Pak Faisal. Bu Diana?
Whether or not he's bluffing or not remain to be seen, right? But of course, maybe internally, for the Americans, maybe some of those bluffs may probably have come to reality. I mean, from the perspective, mega and the MEHA strategies and the American first policy, and what the Americans will see the picks of his advisors on some of the key issues that will affect them domestically, internally. But that will be their battle, of course. But for whether or not President Trump will continue to make an extreme proposition, like I said, I experienced, just from my experience, I experienced the first presidency where I was dealing with human rights issues. We've seen that, U.S. withdrew themselves from some of the important international organizations, including WHO. And when I was doing a human rights council, they also came to the foreign ministry and said, we're going to pull out from human rights council. And of course, we say it's sad, because the U.S. will continue, should be contribute positively to the human rights issues, but it's your own sovereign rights to do so. And usually in the United Nations, when you pull out, we can see that it's sort of like a bluff, because in the Human Rights Council, countries say, so we're not going to be there, but they continue to come to the council, and if there is any discussion that we will have to, take action, vote for a resolution, they still came and voted anyway, right? So is that a bluff? Could be. The second term, well, we hope that the U.S. will not go into that kind of, the first Trump policy when it deals with, United Nations, a multilateral fora, especially with the WHO and all that, because I think the commitment of the U.S. governments in spearheading, many important discussions multilaterally will still be needed. And I'm an optimistic, we will see how it goes, but I would say that the potential could be, half-half. I don't know. I'm not really, here to formulate and to even predict what's going to happen. But judging from what happened in the first presidency, possibility is there. And maybe it could be even worse, but we hope not. So that would be, hopefully that could answer a little bit of what is asked.
Thank you, Bu Diana. And maybe we can go to Derek now to answer both questions. Derek?
Sure, thanks. So I think it's actually kind of humorous that we are wondering whether Trump is just blustering about things, right? Or if it's actually going to happen, because look, we're wondering about whether he's going to do those things. And so that means we still think it works, right? Because we don't know the answer to whether he's bluffing or blustering about stuff or actually going to do stuff, right? The fact that we're sitting here and wondering about it, right, means that we don't know the answer. So to suspect that, to say that foreign leaders right, are simply going to say, well, he used to bluff all the time, and so we're not going to believe him anymore, right? I mean, again, we're sitting here wondering whether he's bluffing or not, so they probably are too, right? So I think that that tactic is still very much in play, and let's also face the reality here. Trump is Trump, right? So Trump, he's what, 78 years old, I believe, right? He's going to be America's oldest president upon entering. I think he's 79, so he'll be America's oldest president upon entering office, and will be the oldest president upon leaving office, right? Assuming he completes his 4-year term. And so, what I'm trying to say here is that people usually don't change that much as they get older, right? I mean, he is dyed in the wool, like he is who he is, right? So I don't expect, frankly, any major changes from him in terms of his negotiating strategy, in terms of all of the different tactics that he throws out there in order to get what he wants. And that leads me to the second question that was aimed at me, which is, do I think that the people he's surrounding himself with this time around are going to carry out his orders? I think absolutely. I mean, that's the point, right? Because in the first Trump administration, he was, new to government. By the way, he's the first president in American history. If for those in Indonesia may not know this, he is the first president in American history who had no prior government or military service at any level, right? But you see, this time around, it's different because he obviously was president for 4 years. And so I think he's learned a lot about what works and what doesn't work. And what he decided what doesn't work is that if you don't have people around you to carry out your orders, then it'll all fall apart, right? Or you won't get what you want. And so I think what you're seeing now with the different nominations, it's primarily, if not exclusively, folks who have been loyal to him, right? Now, I personally have qualms about that, but at the same time, we had an election, and as was pointed out in an earlier presentation, it was a landslide victory by Trump, right? So he clearly has a mandate. And I've also said in the past, and I'll say again, that this is going to be a supercharged Trump presidency, because not only did he have the landslide victory, but he also now controls, his party controls, or he himself, if you want to go there, controls the two chambers of Congress, the House of Representatives and the Senate, slim majorities in both, but still majorities. And then he's also a lame duck president, right? So he's termed out after this, doesn't have to worry about getting reelected. And then a lot of folks forget that just a few months ago, we had our Supreme Court, which is a 6-3 conservative majority, essentially rule that a president can do anything and not get in trouble for it, not face criminal punishment as a result of what they do in office, right? Or out of office, for that matter. And so I think, I'm not going to say that the guardrails have completely fallen off, but they are certainly very, very weakened, right? And I think Trump is very much emboldened. And so to think on the foreign policy, in the foreign policy sphere, that he's not going to kind of like say things that he wants done and not have them be done after that, I think is probably the wrong thought. He is certainly going to say what he means and means what he says. And that, I think, is going to be a challenge, not only for the international community, but also for the United States itself, because, I mean, let's be honest about this. I mean, he is challenging a lot of the way the United States has conducted foreign policy since the end of World War II, right? I mean, at the end of World War II, the United States is the country, in concert with the British and the Soviet Union, we're the ones who set the rules of the road, right? We're the ones who helped establish the United Nations. We are the ones who established a network of alliances and partnerships, right? Trump is challenging all of that. And some would say that he's hearkening back to pre-World War II, the way America was actually for the majority of its history, which was pretty isolationist. And, George Washington himself said that the United States needed to be wary of alliances, right? And then Thomas Jefferson, permanent alliances. And then Thomas Jefferson built upon that by saying entangling alliances, right? So there is kind of like a hearkening back to the way things were before World War II under Trump. Now, does Trump himself know all of that history or care about all that history? I think we can make up our own minds about that, but he's not necessarily out of place in the grand scheme of American foreign policy, the history of American foreign policy. It's just that since the end of World War II, he is.
Thank you, Derek. Now we'll like to open for another questions. Is there anyone in the floor here first that would like to ask questions? Okay, the lady at the back, and then we also have another questions from YouTube, and we'll start with the lady at the back. Please state your name and affiliation.
Thank you for the opportunity. I am Fitri, a master student in international relations from Universitas Indonesia. So my question, I would like to ask about ASEAN role as the cornerstone of Indonesian foreign policy and how it has been affected by the shift in global condition following the Trump administration leadership as the president of the United States. What will this significantly alter ASEAN role in influencing Indonesian policy and how it is defined in this context? Thank you.
Thank you, Mbak Fitri. Do we have another question from the floor? Okay, the guy with batik shirt. Please state your name and affiliations. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. My name is Alan Dharma Saputra. I would like to ask a question to Muhammad Faisal Karim regarding the economic landscape. So, in your presentation, you mentioned that the Trump's tariff affects Southeast Asia and might lead Southeast Asian countries to be dependent on China, maybe to some extent with Japan, possibly Taiwan. So with the recent development like EU and Mercosur agreement, so added to this global trade landscape, how do you see this situation can affect the Southeast Asian countries? Like, are they going to push for another new trade approach or relation, or they just focus on themselves? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mas Alan. And we also have one question from YouTube. This is from Farah. She said that Trump 1.0 greatly challenged ASEAN centrality, and the speaker spoke about the possibility of Trump being disinterested in multilateralism. What steps can be taken by ASEAN to remain relevant in Trump 2.0? And can we expect something akin to AOIP during Trump 2.0 to keep partners interested in ASEAN? I guess we can start from Budiana. Do you want to start?
Can I hear one more time the question from the lady at the back from the University of Indonesia? Something along the line with the question on ASEAN and how it can vis-a-vis the Trump 2.0.
So it's like ASEAN has been influenced Indonesian foreign policy, and how this global changing will affect how ASEAN roles influence Indonesian foreign policy.
In influencing Indonesia. I think it's not about who's influencing who. ASEAN will continue to be the cornerstone of Indonesian foreign policy. Indonesia is the largest country in ASEAN. Indonesia has the modalities. Indonesia, one of the big key players in ASEAN, but we've never imposed our foreign policy, our values to ASEAN. ASEAN has the charter that now I think it's in the stage of maybe there is a potential of having to look at the to review and to strengthen how ASEAN mechanism can work more effectively, and ASEAN has a lot of ASEAN-led mechanisms such as ASEAN, like East Asia Summit with the dialogue partners, ASEAN Regional Security Forum and all that. And I think this is a good opportunity for ASEAN to continue to be more consolidated. That's why I think it's important to note and to look at the joint statement between the Indonesian president and President Biden. I think I think 2-3 pages at the last pages of the joint statement. I think it's important to look at how even the U.S., the President Biden, highlights or underscores the support of ASEAN centrality. And I think this we can still continue to expect from President Trump, when he later on engages with Indo-Pacific and ASEAN within the context of Indo-Pacific. And with the minilateralism, I think the Quad and the AUKUS, and even in the joint statement, both presidents continues to look the Quad positively vis-a-vis ASEAN. So I think it's important that ASEAN not only to continue to make it more relevant, but to strengthen its centrality, in navigating in, especially some of the ASEAN countries may probably have had their, internal, issues, but I think ASEAN continues to be strong. And then I think Indonesia, I haven't been dealing anything with ASEAN, but when I was doing ASEAN Human Rights Commission during its first stage of negotiation, including when it was actually being launched by the leaders way back in Hua Hin, I think it's important that ASEAN will continue to, promote very important, basic, universal, issues to the world, and ASEAN will continue to play its role in that regard during the second presidency of President Trump.
Thank you, Budiana. Maybe before we go to Pak Faisal, because you have 3 questions, maybe we go to Derek first, so that you can answer the first and the third questions. Derek, please.
Yeah. So, well, I'll just say on ASEAN and Trump. So I think it'll be very interesting to see how that plays out. My sense is, and I think I said this in my opening remarks, that Trump is very likely to keep the minilateral groupings that the Biden administration has established. He's certainly going to keep the Quad. I mean, he's the one who went to the Asia Pacific in November of 2017, gave a speech renaming the region as the Indo-Pacific, and quietly on the sidelines of his speech, the Quad met for the first time since 2007 or 2008, depending on how you characterize it. And so, and the Trump administration, part one, worked in earnest to elevate the level of meetings that they had in the Quad, right? And eventually got to Secretary of State level and the Foreign Minister level for the other 3 countries, right? And so that was a really big deal. And then the Biden administration carried it over and had, I think it was 7 summit level meetings, some of which were virtual, but nonetheless, right? Summit level Quad meetings. So the Quad to me is something that is bureaucratically in motion. It would be hard to kind of dial back. It also now has numerous protections to prevent political transitions in each of the 4 countries from harming its viability in the future. And that's actually how the Quad that was how the Quad ended the first time around. And so I see the Quad. Again, Trump was the one who said yes, it's okay for the Quad to meet again. Let's do that. I don't see him walking that back, but I do. But I could see him looking at some of those mini-lateral organizations set up under the Biden administration and saying, well, that's something my predecessor did, so I'm just going to do the opposite. But that would also require a lot of focus and scrutiny of these organizations. I frankly don't really think they're much on the radar for him. And if you look at great power competition, they help toward winning great power competition, whatever winning looks like, but they clearly, you'd rather have them than not have them, right? So how does that impact ASEAN? What I can see is not so much a Trump Part 2 focus on ASEAN, but more this re-energizing of minilaterals that steadily undermine the centrality of ASEAN and frankly the effectiveness of ASEAN in getting things done within Southeast Asia. The Biden administration's already, I mean, as much as I thought the Biden administration, as much as I think the Biden administration has done a really great job in the Indo-Pacific, I also cannot, square that with the fact that by setting up all of these different trilaterals, they have actually undermined the effectiveness and centrality of ASEAN. I think it's inadvertent, but I also think that it is happening, right? And and regardless of who's president, whether it's Biden or Trump, right? When we say that ASEAN is central to the Indo-Pacific, right? We should abide by that, right? We should try to let ASEAN take the lead. I think the issue for us in the United States is that we don't really see ASEAN taking the lead. We see the Philippines deepening and expanding its alliance with the United States to counter China. But other than that, everybody else is pretty much trying to stay non-aligned, trying to stay out of geopolitical competition. And that does not align with what the U.S. is trying to do. And so when you see organizations like the Quad, when you see the Squad, when you see AUKUS, right, all of these different things, they are, the way I think about it is they're picking up the slack from where ASEAN is not coming through. And that's unfortunate. And I think that could actually, that fissure could deepen during the second Trump administration.
Thank you, Derek. And now we can go to Pak Faisal to answer all three questions.
I think all three questions have the same kind of underpinning question. So I think I'm gonna just make a one big discussion on this so-called role of ASEAN and how Trump might impact the way how.
Sorry, the room is muted again. I can't hear.
Okay. Yeah, how Indonesia view ASEAN. So first thing first, I think I would argue that ASEAN is too fast and too furious in terms of its, economic integration, because usually when it comes to ASEAN integration, it's not yet done, because you look at European Union, the intra-trade relation is almost like a 70% or 60 to 70% of the entire economic trade within the region. But in the case of ASEAN, it's only like a 25%. So that is the reason why we so-called invent the idea of centrality, because we heavily rely on an extra partners. So because we are not done yet with our integration. So I think given the past 10 years, we are a little bit difficult in terms of how making sure ASEAN still stay relevant in the regional order, or perhaps East Asia regional order. I think it's time for us to rethink, I think, on the so-called regional integration project within ASEAN itself. In 2013, we see how Indonesia tried to lead in creating a so-called RCEP, right? How we try to reinvent the way we see this regional partner can be part of the whole package of ASEAN-led regional integration. But it seems it's not yet seen as an ASEAN, but rather as a Chinese initiative, even though it's not true. It's basically ASEAN-led. So in that sense, Trump administration hopefully will make Indonesia or ASEAN leaders try to look ASEAN as in a new lens, as if that we need to rethink about it and try to how making sure that our intra-trade, and it can be done because now with this kind of Trump focus on bilateral over multilateral and so on and so forth, it's time for Indonesia and ASEAN countries to basically kind of invest in the so-called integration, such as how to make sure that the inequality among Asian countries can be reduced, or perhaps how to engage more, because we have a high level economy like Malaysia, to some extent Singapore and Malaysia, and we have like a upper middle Thailand. I'm not sure Indonesia, is it already there, and also least developed like Myanmar. So how to connect between these without heavily rely on external powers? I think that would need to be envisioned and revisit as a part of Indonesian strategy to enhance ASEAN. And secondly, I think people talk a lot about non-alignment and how bebas aktif somehow is considered as a non-alignment, which I think is not really fully true, because bebas aktif cannot be seen as a equal with non-alignment. I think bebas aktif is more about how to basically navigate, right? You can basically, to some extent, also pro something, yeah, or perhaps leaning towards something or some countries, because the idea of bebas aktif is always try to make sure that Indonesia gain its national interest through navigating in a turbulent ocean. And I think this is what Indonesia needs to be done, or in fact ASEAN. I think in the next 2 or 3 years, there is a pressure for ASEAN to choose instead of just sitting on the fence. So how basically when we are being asked to choose whether are we going to focus on China, are we going to focus on the US, and I think to some extent these two great power will eventually push us to choose between the two, and I think we need to choose wisely. And secondly, in terms of the role of ASEAN and how Trump basically impact ASEAN role, I think there are two aspects. The first one is basically I've already discussed about the ASEAN trade integration, and secondly, I think it's a South China Sea issue, right? In South China Sea issue, we see Trump is getting increasingly aggressive toward China, and the same goes with China as well. And the question then, how ASEAN manage this kind of increasingly volatile and hostile sea, given that some of ASEAN countries like Philippines has been saying that it's going to to counter China, but at the same time Indonesia seemingly remain neutral, which I think is not really a good option when it comes to South China Sea. So again, these are two aspects that ASEAN needs to rethink, but I don't know the answer yet. But I think if we just do a business as usual, not really looking at how bad our internal integration in terms of trade and economy, and how we remain neutral in the case of South China Sea, I don't think we can make ASEAN in the center or in the driving seat anymore.
Thank you, Pa Faisal. I think we still have time for 2 or 3 questions. We do have 1 question from YouTube, so maybe we can take another 1 or 2 questions from the floor. Is there anyone that would like to ask questions? Okay, yes. Yeah, we can take both questions. Please state your name and affiliation. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity. I would like to ask, my name is Gravinia, and I would like to ask a question about a climate link that Pa Faisal has mentioned before at the presentation. So climate link has become a critical component of international cooperation, particularly as countries face increasing environmental risk. And Indonesia, with vast natural resources and strategic role in the global supply chain, is heavily affected by climate-related policies. International partnerships such as GETP, or Just Energy Transition Partnership, aim to support Indonesia's transition to renewable energy. However, a potential shift in the US leadership under Donald Trump, who previously deprioritized environmental issue, could disrupt climate-linked investment and slow progress towards sustainability goals. So my question is, given the potential reduction in US climate-linked investment under Trump administration, how can Indonesia diversify its partnership and financing sources to ensure a sustainable energy transition while balancing its economic development goals? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. My name is Nabila from Universitas of Indonesia. My question is perhaps more focused on Budiana as the practitioner here. Since we've been discussing about the ASEAN centrality, I'm curious to hear a practitioner perspective on this concept. When we read articles about ASEAN centralities, there are many criticisms, with some scholars even claiming that ASEAN centrality is merely a lip service. As someone who is directly involved in the field, do you think these criticisms are valid? For example, considering the perspective of the US and Japan, how do these two countries currently view ASEAN centrality? Is it merely about ASEAN being a dialect provider, or does it reflect real power and influence? Thank you.
Thank you, Mbak. Then we also have one last question from YouTube. This is from Saiful Fuad. He asked, how effective has the relationship been in impacting Indonesia's political interests? How can it be positive for future policies? I think maybe we can start from Derek for these questions.
Thanks. Yeah, I think maybe only the third question is something that I am qualified to answer. So, I mean, although, my esteemed colleagues on the panel there are probably more qualified than me to answer this about Indonesia, but I would say that, Indonesia's foreign policy toward the United States, has been one that has had a warming trend really for decades. But in particular, I think in the last few years, things have really gotten much improved. But the thing that I guess I kind of worry about is that a lot of U.S. foreign policy toward Indonesia is about securitizing Indonesia, right? Trying to enlist Indonesia as part of this greater geostrategic rivalry against China. And that, I think we can all agree, is not going to work and is not fair to the people of Indonesia, right? But that said, there's no reason why Indonesia should not take that security assistance and security cooperation with the United States and use it to Jakarta's advantage. And I think that is exactly what's happening. And what I'm concerned about is that the U.S. doesn't really seem to want to offer much else. I mean, we talked a lot about tariffs during this discussion. Of course, Trump is going to try to, he's at least threatening, bluffing, blustering, whatever, right, to bring tariffs back, right, or to use tariffs in disproportionate ways against some of the different trading partners we have, right? And I get the sense, that we in the United States don't really have a good economic strategy, not just in Indonesia, but in the rest of the Indo-Pacific and frankly, globally. And a lot of that is because of our political gridlock. If there's one thing that the extreme left of the political spectrum and extreme right of the political spectrum have in common, it's that they don't want to see American jobs shipped overseas. And any sort of bilateral or multilateral trade agreements that we sign up to, there even just the perception that American jobs could be lost because of that, neither side will budge, right? And so I don't see us doing much economically with Indonesia, and that's unfortunate because now look on the other side, China's doing a ton with your country economically, right? Whether it's through Belt and Road Initiative, or whether it's during the pandemic through COVID relief. I mean, a lot of the vaccines that were used in Indonesia came from China, not from the United States, right? And this papers over some of the real differences that Indonesia and China have, especially in the North Natuna Sea or the South China Sea, the southernmost dash of the 9-dash line, right? So these kinds of things. So Indonesia is essentially leveraging China's economic heft and leveraging the United States' security heft to its advantage. But what exactly is the United States getting out of that? I'm not so sure. I have some concerns about it, and I also have some concerns about where this is going to go in the future if there continues to be this divergence in Indonesia-U.S. relations on every other part of the relationship besides the security side. So I'll just leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Derek. Maybe we can go to Pak Faisal for the climate link questions.
Thank you, Mbak Indira. So when it comes to just energy transition partnership, I think like the US give like 1.5 billion or what, like a 2.5 billion, well, the commitment, but that's not big enough for Indonesian in order to move Indonesia to a green energy transition. It took like 100 billion, if I'm not mistaken, judging from the economic forecast. But I kind of believer of the so-called market instrument. So I think Indonesia, I mean, we've discussed with Bu Diana about carbon pricing, carbon market. So this is the way to go, right? So the problem is Indonesia, our kind of a green investment mechanism or green market mechanism is not yet developed. We see carbon pricing is a huge thing. A lot of people in the global north really needs this. And we do have a green bonds as well. I think Kemenq, Indonesian Minister of Finance, has tried to sell this so-called green bond, sukuk. Yeah, it's also a huge kind of a potential market for us. Not to mention about, tax credits, public-private partnership, and so on and so forth. So in a way that international donor is good in, kind of creating early mover, but I think at the end of the day, it's up to Indonesian government and also the markets in general, how we can basically create a more innovative initiative, like a venture capital focusing on green investment. Don't get me wrong, green investment is kind of growing in East Asia. In fact, China is also a proponent of the so-called Green Belt and Road Initiative. It invests a lot in solar panel and so on and so forth. So we can tap that, but the problem is the instrument. I think just recently we got this carbon value, CEV, carbon economic value in 2022, if I'm not mistaken. So we are yet still in the stage of regulatory creation, but moving forward, we need to create more instruments. So I think we don't need to heavily rely on the US or any other international donor. Yes, we do still need World Bank, EU, and the US, but eventually, if we can create our own carbon market, I think we can develop that for our green transition.
Thank you, Pa Faisal, for that. And then we go to Bu Diana for the question on ASEAN centrality concept from the practitioner perspective. Bu, silakan.
Thank you. This is $1 million question. $1 million question or rupiahs question, but it's too small, eh? I'm not a ASEAN practitioner. As I said, I had 18 years experience in multilateral diplomacy, 26 or 27 coming up as the civil servant, Indonesian dip. But ASEAN is something that Indonesian diplomats can shy away from. ASEAN centrality, let me just put it this way. ASEAN centrality is not a myth, for sure. It's a hard-won, not just a concept, but it's actually probably the only sub-regional organization that has been successful in maintaining its centrality. The possibility of centrality being undermined, yes, especially when the centrality is confronted by the way the organization or ASEAN, navigates or acts or responds to the dynamics in the region and being co-opted by those dynamics, not by the needs of its member states. I think it's important to, to maintain that, to capitalize that hard-won centrality of ASEAN. We're looking into the fact that many countries, including the US, many times repeatedly supports ASEAN centrality. It's a big deal, of course. But we cannot be complacent, of course, as the ASEAN members, and then not many, and especially given the fact that there are now so many minilateralism limited, exclusive, sort of like platforms. ASEAN is quite multi-layered, with 10 plus now 11 with Timor-Leste, right? Recently joined, and the dialogue partners that basically spans over across regional. When, at the multilateral fora, usually Indonesia is very active in spearheading cross-regional collaboration, because usually many multilateral issue cannot be discussed only in limited, a close conversation. But ASEAN is quite open, and I think as a practitioner, it's one of the hard-won, achievement that ASEAN has, have done. The progress have been there, and then many supports. And I think we cannot be complacent. We have to make sure we can still work on that centrality, not being undermined. Possibly can do so if the ASEAN member states are responding and then making a move, but only based on the dynamics, but not in looking into their priorities and needs, to make sure that ASEAN needs and priorities are reflected in those dynamics. So I'd like to stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Budiana, for answering that questions very diplomatically, as expected from a senior diplomat. And as we... oh, that is a compliment, Bu. That is a compliment, Bu. As we approach the end of our seminar, I would like to invite our speakers to deliver their short closing remarks. Maybe we can start with Budiana. Do you want to start first, Bu? Just a short closing remark.
So once again, of course, thank you so much for this opportunity. This kind of platform is very important, and for the foreign ministry, for us to engage and be engaged in this kind of open platform, is very important. And for us from the Foreign Policy Strategy Agency, is think tank that would like to offer not just its cooperation, but also it's open-minded to work with many of you, including the think tank, private think tanks, and then also to educate a public, including academics and many others, to work towards the world that is more just, peaceful, and prosperous. So for me, thank you once again.
Thank you very much, Budiana. And Pa Faisal, just short closing.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I think the US still remains an important partners for Indonesia, despite Trump being elected as a president, and there are challenges ahead and things like that. But I think it's more about us, how we can deal with those challenges. So my take will be, given that Trump is always seen itself as a deal maker, people who can negotiate, I think it's up to President Prabowo, who also is seen as a foreign policy president or IR president, who have a deep understanding of geopolitics, to showcase his kind of understanding of this geopolitics and how he can manage to navigate the US-China rivalry under Trump. Because at the end of the day, I'm afraid that the era where we don't need to choose, we don't need we can just be a fence sitter is gone. So I think it might going to be unavoidable, and I think we need someone like Ibu Diana, like other foreign policy diplomats and things like that, to come up with new idea for Indonesia centrality in both in ASEAN and the regional level. And we do hope that there is something coming up from our foreign policy president anytime soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Pa Faisal. And Derek, are you still there? Yes.
Yeah, I am. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'll just say that I've really enjoyed participating in this discussion, and thanks again for the invite. And I think, as maybe you could tell from my remarks, I mean, there's both promise and peril with the incoming Trump administration for Southeast Asia. On the promise side, let's be optimistic for a moment, right? I think a number of countries that are trying to push back against China, they will have additional support from the United States or consistent support, since the Biden administration. They'll continue to get support, right? But and also on the promise side, those who are semi-authoritarian or authoritarian in nature, Trump's more transactional approach, I think, will facilitate a discussion with them that maybe would not have been possible under the Biden administration, who came in with a values-based approach to foreign policy. But on the peril side, of course, as you engage in great power competition and it intensifies over time, there's always the chance for miscalculation and escalation into crisis and ultimately armed conflict. And that, of course, is something that nobody wants. Path of continuing, again, like I was talking about with Indonesia, as we continue to go down this path of securitizing everything, rather than using some of the other tools in our toolkit of statecraft, such as economic diplomacy, then we run a greater risk, that is, of eventually having a war with China in the region. And that is not something that, of course, anybody wants, neither the US nor China as well. So I hate to leave on a kind of sobering note, but that is, I think, where my head is at with the incoming Trump administration. And we'll have to wait and see what happens, especially in year one. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Derek. And that brings us to the end of our seminar. I would like to thank all of our speakers. Thank you so much, Ibu Diana. Thank you so much, Pak Faisal. And thank you, Derek, for joining us this morning or evening. And as this is our last Talking ASEAN for the year, we'd also like to thank those of you who have been joining us throughout this year. And if you'd like to stay updated on future events, please follow the Habibie Center on our social media. And before you leave, please check on your belongings and make sure to throw your trash into the bin we've provided at the back of the room. Thank you once again, and we look forward to seeing you at Talking ASEAN next year. Happy holidays, everyone. Thank you.